I wanna wake up in the morning where the orange blossoms grow, and the sun comes peeping in where I've been sleeping, and the songbirds say hello. I love the fresh air and the sunshine. It's good for us, you know. So I'll make my home in Florida where the orange blossoms grow.
Sally Parks, and I feel very fortunate today to have the opportunity to talk to Steve Bragin. Steve, welcome, and thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up, and because I know you're a Tampa Bay area guy.
Well, I grew up in Tampa from about age 2. Went to all the normal preschool and then grammar school, Woodrow Wilson Junior High, and did not go to Plant in those days. That's where you went. I went to Jesuit High School, which then was in downtown Tampa. It was a good education. The Jebbies were serious teachers.
And were you a serious student?
No. I was not. That's part of the reason that they sent me to Jesuit High School. What I enjoyed, I did well in, and what I didn't enjoy wasn't of interest to me. But I did stay there for a couple of years, and then went on to a place called Castle Heights Military Academy, and eventually on to the University of Pennsylvania and Wharton School. That was my education background.
Tell me about your family background.
Let's see. Well, the reason that we're here in Florida is because of my grandfather, David Bilgore. On my mother's side, she was a Bilgore. He was literally a produce peddler in New York and wanted to come down to the resource. And he ended up in Tampa, had a partner or two in packing houses, one in Tampa, and eventually over here. My father married my mother. My father was a graduate dentist who graduated from dental school so young they wouldn't give him a license because he wasn't 21 years old. So he drove a taxi in New York for a little while. And then his father-in-law, David Bilgore, was unhappy with the partnership that he had down here, and he asked my father if he'd like to go to Florida and help run the business. And my father says, how soon? Because he really did not like being a dentist, and probably wasn't very good at it. But he found himself in the business world, which he really enjoyed, and he really was quite good at it. He came to Tampa, and my mother, sister, and I stayed in New York till I was about 2, and then we all moved down here together with him and lived in Tampa.
So, Steve, that must have been during the Depression years?
1931. Yeah.
So it was.
Yeah, and but he found himself as a businessman. He really was quite good at it. We lived in Tampa, and he used to drive back and forth on the Davis Causeway, which became the Courtney Campbell Causeway during the Second World War. And the Davis brothers used to charge a fee. It was a toll road. And my father didn't understand about stopping to pay, so he would drive around the little pay booth that they had there, they knew him, and he'd wave at them and beep the horn, and they'd take out a piece of paper and mark down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then he'd stop every once in a while and pay them. And but that's when it was.
Do you know how much the toll was?
I honestly don't know. It couldn't have been much more than a nickel a dime.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was money then.
So your dad was based in Tampa, but he had groves and so on
Yeah,
over
well,
here, packing
he-
houses?
He ran the business for his father-in-law, David
For
Bilger.
David Bilger, uh-huh.
And he did that all his life while he was down here. And eventually, in the 50s, they moved to Clearwater because it really was getting impossible. I mean, he used to drive 60 miles a day, 30 miles here and 30 miles back.
But there wasn't any toll on the road.
Yeah, there was a toll
Oh, still
on the
was.
Davis. And then during the Second World War, Courtney Campbell declared it an emergency exit from Pinellas County in case of an invasion, and bought out, or I guess bought out isn't the right word, declared it an emergency exit, and it became Courtney Campbell Parkway. The other end, one end was the radio station on the Tampa side, and they had toll roads that were toll booths that were taken down, and then it became the Courtney Campbell.
Steve, did your grandparents live with you, or they had their own home, I take it?
No, my grandfather lived with us most of the year, and his wife, who didn't like it here, she lived back in New York. But my grandfather lived with us for 20 years, I guess, off and on. When the citrus season was on, he was here. When it wasn't, he still stayed here most of the time.
So what was it like growing up with a grandfather in your home at least half of the year?
Oh, it was wonderful. He was if I had a mentor, it was him, my father, and probably Father Loring from Jesuit High School, who also was a great influence in my life. They were all good people. We used to sit around the dinner table at night, and it was required that you participated in the dinner conversation. Didn't make any difference whether you were 5 years old or 60 years old. And you were expected to respond to the questions and have an opinion. So it was a good way to grow up. And from there, as I say, I went off to school.
So tell me what your house looked like when you were a child.
We lived in Tampa, in Hyde Park, which, if anybody knows where the Hyde Park Shopping Center is in Tampa, I lived a block and a half from there in an apartment house called the Seville Apartments. There were a 6-story building. The apartments all the apartments on the right were 3-bedroom, and all the apartments on the left were 2-bedroom. We had a 3-bedroom apartment, and they moved out of there after 20-some years, I guess. And the day they moved out, I think we still were the newest tenants. Nobody ever left there. It was, the apartments were old-time apartments with extra 2 feet of ceiling and big rooms, and it really was quite nice. But that's really where I grew up, and grew up with mostly friends from Tampa, most of whom turned out to be attorneys. I didn't make that.
They didn't taint you, right?
No, they wouldn't. No.
Steve, well, tell me about the activities that you did as a kid. What kinds, besides going to school, obviously, were you required to work in the family business? Did you have some fun? What did you do in your leisure time?
Well, I played a lot of tennis. I played almost all sports, but tennis was my passion. Racquetball sports, including racquetball, was another one of the things that I really was interested in. One of the highlights of my life was that I won a few tournaments quite young, and when Don Budge is a name from the past, had just won Wimbledon, he came over to the Davis Island Tennis Club, and I got the honor of being ball boy in a exhibition match that he had, and then he taught us, a couple of us. There were guys like some of them went on to be quite prominent in Tampa. Broadus Livingston and Dick Reeves were attorneys who became heads of some of the largest law firms in Tampa. But we had you rode your bicycle everywhere. Nobody locked the door. The milkman came to the back door, and he'd open the back door and go into the refrigerator, see how much milk you had, and there was a can up on top of the ice box, which literally was an ice box, and then the refrigerator. And if he put stuff in, he'd take money out. If there wasn't enough money, he'd leave a note. And the milkman and the eggman used to do that all the time. And when it was an ice box, the iceman used to do it. He'd just come in the back door, and you'd hear him, but you didn't bother him because he took care of it.
So they'd leave butter and cream and milk and
eggs, whatever he served. And we were kids, and it was the Iceman. We'd all run outside because we'd get ice to chew on, chips.
Give you a little chip of ice.
It was a different world. Nobody really locked doors like locked doors. I assume at night, maybe, I don't know, but during the day the door was always open. My father would leave for work, and he'd leave because we were in Tampa, and he'd come over here to Clearwater, so he'd leave 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and he'd go out the back door and go to the garage and take
So
the car.
your family had a car. Do you remember what the car was?
Yes, we mostly had either Oldsmobiles, or if things were really good, we'd move up to a Buick. But we never could buy Cadillacs. And the reason was that my grandfather used to say, how in the devil can you drive into somebody's grove who's struggling to raise his fruit and sell it in a big Cadillac? He says, you're going to lose from the day you drive in. So nobody in my family ever owned a Cadillac.
A little too pretentious,
It was too pretentious. Buick is as far as we went.
Did your family take trips together? Do you remember taking
yeah.
road trips, or
We
did
used
you
to
take the train somewhere, or what?
Well, let's start off with the train. I went to a lot of camps because I was athletic and I enjoyed it. And I'd get on a train and have a sleeping compartment when I was little. I mean, 8 to teenage days. I'd get on a train and they'd put me in a compartment. And whoever the porter was, he would kind of look after me. I was really pretty independent. Those things never worried me. And I'd go to wherever it was the camp was, somebody would meet me, and I'd go to camp and come back in 2-3 weeks sometimes. And if it involved sports, I was anxious to do it, and it was good. It was a terrific life. But
So give me an idea of where you might have gone. How far did you go up
Oh,
to,
no.
say, Tallahassee?
oh
or
no!
to
Went up
Melbourne? Or
No, up to northeast United States. Went to one camp called Greylock, which was upstate Pennsylvania. It was a great camp because all the kids who went there participated in sports, and it was competitive, and I loved that kind of stuff. I didn't like to lose. I don't know where I got that from, but I really didn't. And that went on for a number of years, and then I used to play a lot of tennis. Even back in those days, there really wasn't a circuit to play tennis as a young boy or young girl. There were girls who played too. It was sort of by guess and by gosh. You'd play in Winter Haven and Lakeland, and a big trip was you'd spend the night up in Jacksonville and play in Jacksonville. And a really big trip was to go to Atlanta to play in. And we did it as kids. One of the parents would generally drive us, and there'd be 2 or 3 in the car. I think we went to Savannah once and played, and we were all sort of ranked, not the way you get ranked now because it's all written down, but we all got ranked, and you played against
the same level of competition.
Yes, same level of competition, and you got to know a lot of people that way.
Sure. Did you, let's talk a little bit about family trips then. Do you remember taking family trips with your parents, your siblings?
We'd go probably once I was going to say once a year, but I don't think it was that often. But pretty frequently we would try to go up to New York, which is where my folks were from and had relatives, and where the Bilgore family was. In fact, my mother's eldest brother, Morris Bilgore, lived there. He eventually moved down here, but most of his life was up there. And so we'd go up to New York in the car mostly. My mother couldn't, we tried once or twice to put her on a boat, but she had this inner ear thing that meant her sense of balance would go a little cockeyed when she got on a boat.
So your father did most of the driving, or all of the driving?
All of the driving.
Okay. So Mom didn't drive?
No, she drove. My father was famous for driving fast, not rapid, fast. He also had a horrible sense of direction. And he, upon occasion...
Dangerous for a man, isn't it?
he occasionally... Well, there's one great family story about we were leaving Florida to get, and we stopped at the intersection where 2 roads came together to make a single road. And there was a gas station there, and he pulled in, got gas, and in big conversation, literally went back on the other road back towards Tampa with us all screaming at him. It wasn't that he was dumb, because he really was pretty smart, but that was one of his failings.
Understand. We've all known people like that, I guess. So if you were Did you eat a lot of citrus as a child? Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, sure. We always had citrus on the table. The only one that didn't eat citrus was my sister, because she didn't like it, which I think she was about 5.5 years older than I was. Gorgeous woman. But she didn't like citrus, so she didn't eat. But yeah, sure, we ate citrus all the time.
So did the Bilgore family and your father and you raise all kinds of citrus, lemons, limes, oranges, grapefruit?
Mostly a lot of grapefruit. Pinellas County grapefruit was a premium product.
Why was that?
It just was better. It was like they promoted the Indian River grapefruit, but Pinellas County grapefruit was always a premium when you sold it on the market. In New York, they used to, the trucks would leave here and go to the markets in New York, and they'd auction them off. And that was a life-changing experience. Those people they all were fighting for 2.5 cents or a nickel, and and you try to get the bid up, obviously, but if it was a shortage, you could get a lot of money.
I've always, and I wondered if this is an urban myth, I've always wondered, is there any truth to the fact that the thunderstorms and lightning storms that we have makes the fruit richer and tastier?
Not one I've heard. It's the soil and the rain at the right time, and the rootstock and the trees. But Pinellas County was always well known for its grapefruit.
What's your favorite kind of grapefruit?
I used to like Duncan grapefruit. That's the one with seeds that nobody else likes.
Oh, I love Duncans. They're my favorite too.
But they never would. Wrong. They would sell, but people didn't like them because they had all the seeds and they had to take the seeds out. In fact, we used this, one of our great customers later on was Harry and David, and we shipped the grapefruit for Harry and David for maybe 15, 18 years. They were wonderful people to do business with. They eventually became one of the largest rose growers also in the United States. They used to take over the packing house. They'd come down and they would, we'd plan it in advance, and they would send out, we would load the grapefruit, 4 or 6 pieces of grapefruit of a particular size in cartons, and they would send us the mail pieces, the mail
Labels.
labels, but they would be pre-made in a postal machine, which they would mail us from Medford, Oregon. This is an interesting side bit that most people don't know. I don't know if it's still true. It was true. Postmasters were paid on the amount of postage that passed through their post office. Their ranking and the amount of money that they got were related to the amount of postage. Well, Harry and David sent out hundreds and thousands all year long, 12 months out of the year. And all the postal meters came out of this little town in Medford, Oregon. And the postmaster in Medford, Oregon got paid about the same thing as the postmaster of the city of New York. Because of the amount of postage.
Just the volume, yeah.
The volume and postage.
Right.
And we used to wait for those. We'd send out all first and second postal zones and put them in trucks and mail them to, and the truckload would go to Chicago and would go to Kansas City and want to go to New York and want to go to Pittsburgh, and we sent them out all the time.
Did you did all the packaging then for
Yes.
Harry and David? It was really just waiting for the labels to put on it, and then their time that they wanted it sent.
And they were super people to be with. They would send down 2 or 3 people and take over the whole packing house. We ran it, but they took it over and supervised it. And after a while, they'd only send one. But they used to do the same thing when they sold peaches and when they sold everything.
Pears, yes, right.
Everything that they did. And they were super people to do business with.
Let's back up a little bit. We're at this property on Curlew Road
Yep.
in Palm Harbor. And was this one of many groves that your family had, or the main grove, or
This
what?
was the largest.
How many
but-
acres, do you know?
Was 140. 45. But this piece that we're sitting on belonged to John S. Taylor, this little piece here, this 15 acres in the front here.
Right.
And we wanted the piece because it solidified the larger grove that we had in the back. And we ended up buying it from John S. Taylor, who John S. Taylor was probably the largest from Largo.
Most people know the groves there on
Yeah.
Keene Road that is
Yeah.
now a park and what have you. Yeah.
Well,
And more. I mean,
and
I know there
more.
was
He
more.
probably was one of the 2 or 3 largest landholders in Pinellas County. And I used to call on him. We did some business together. And he was the first man that I knew that you couldn't walk into his office if you smoked. And this was a long time ago when everybody smoked. He wouldn't let anybody smoke. Yeah, he was a good guy to do business with.
Right.
And
So-
I was Stevie, by the way. I was so young, I was Stevie.
Right, right. So on this property, you grew grapefruit and oranges primarily, or only grapefruit? Do you know?
Mostly, let's see. Let me see if I can remember all that. No, grapefruit and oranges. No, there was some navel oranges here too, but grapefruit and oranges. And it went all the way back to where the school is. About
Okay.
where the school is.
So almost to Tampa Road.
Yes, short of Tampa Road, but almost there. And
So
the
from Curlew to Tampa, and then on the east, it was not as far as Belcher Road, obviously. The Hartley House and so on is there. That's our museum.
No, we did not go. The eastern side of our property is just, I don't know, 50 yards, 100 yards to the
east. Okay.
It's
It's deep.
It's deep, and it ran all the way up to where the Seavers were. That family.
That is now Seavers Landing.
Yeah.
Right,
And the Seavers were there.
right.
Across the street. We owned the stuff to the west, and they owned, and of course the Joneses were up here.
Winona and Charlie.
Yeah. And their home place was the corner. Their home place was the corner of Curlew and County Road 1.
Right.
On the corner was their, and who was the brother who was a nice guy who redid old automobiles? Oh,
That would be Charlie's brother?
yeah.
I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I don't know that name. Well, we'll try to find it
Yeah.
out. So, tell me about the oranges that you grew here. You told me about your favorite being Duncan grapefruit. So you like Navels and Hamlins. Did you grow
yeah,
those?
sure, there
And
were Hamlin
talk a
orange-
little bit about the oranges that you grew, the kind of oranges, and then
Well, they
how did
were-
you sell them? And then
Well,
how
we
did
had
you
a
sell 'em?
packing house
Right, which was where?
downtown Clearwater. Or, as it came on later, they processed them either other concentrators, Hood's in Dunedin. We eventually built a single-strength juice canning plant, which was opposite Ruth Eckerd Hall. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, we
I
had a
don't
canning.
remember that.
Yeah, we had a canning plant there, which we built right after the Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
About across from the kapok tree, I guess.
yes,
Uh-huh.
we were slightly north, right on the railroad tracks, and owned a grove just on the other side. And in fact, we owned a little piece across Booth McMullen or McMullen Booth, depending on which one you knew better. Right across the street, and it was a low piece, and we eventually donated. And that was Alligator Lake, it was called.
Mm-hmm.
And because
Still there.
yeah, because of the property lines, we actually owned some property that was on the south side, which to us was not usable, and we eventually donated it to Ruth Eckerd.
Yes, I
Yeah.
remember that. The packing house. So this was seasonal people that you hired to both pick and pack?
Yes, we had picking crews. In business terms, we were eventually vertically integrated into the business. Boy, my professor would love the use of that term. It just meant that we literally covered it from either the top down or the bottom up, and had eventually a packing house, a canning plant. My Howard Lawrence married my cousin, and he had this idea of retail stores, so we ended up with some retail stores.
Oh gosh, I remember when I moved here in the 60s, we used to line up at the beginning of the season in front of Bill Gore Groves on Myrtle
Yeah.
to get our orange
Yeah.
fix and our
Right.
Dunkin' grapefruit fix.
Well,
If we didn't have friends that grew them on trees, then we sure got them from Bill Gore's.
well, that's good. I appreciate it. I've been saving that money all these years.
So you were a businessman. What was your business role in this this dynasty? Really, it was. I think that's what it was.
I've never been a desk man, and Howard and I made a good team at the time because Howard married my cousin Lila. It was Lila Bilgore. And Howard actually was an accountant and a detail man. That is not my strength, but it is and was his. So we made a good team, but I love to buy and sell. And eventually we needed someone to buy more fruit than we grew or used in the packing house for the canning plant, because we needed to keep it going. We made single strength juice, which we sold to everybody, but A&P and Safeway, Grand Union used their labels. So I became fruit buyer, which I loved. I got in a car, drove all over the state, bought fruit from, and did business with people like Ben Hill Griffin and Tony Rossi, who was Tropicana.
Absolutely, all legends in the state history,
and,
of course.
And more times than not, I was young enough that I was called Stevie. It used to amaze me because they knew me when I was a kid, and not a kid,
Right.
But,
You were a youngster
a
compared to
youngster,
them.
and I used to tell everybody, I wasn't Mr. Bragin. Well, that's a funny story. I once came back to the packing house in Clearwater. I'd been working on a weekend, and you had to test the fruit to make sure that there were guidelines as to what was usable fruit, and it was mature enough to use in order to protect the taste of all fruit that you could either use in a canning plant or in fresh fruit. And so I had gone across the state to get about 6 or 8 samples from various groves that we were waiting, because if you really got it early and it was fresh fruit, you really got a terrific price for it. If you could get it up to the market first, you could get 2, 3, 4 times the amount that you would get 4 weeks later. And in those days, $1 was really $1. In any case, I came back raining like the dog. I mean, raining like crazy. And I had about 6 or 8 samples that I had to run. And there was a covered parking space there. And the covered parking spaces were for Mr. Taylor, which, you know, Dillard Nash? Well, Dillard's wife, his father, was the Mr. Taylor that worked for us. And I knew him since I was a little fellow. And so it was raining like the devil, and I had all these samples to run. So it was like a Saturday or maybe a Sunday, I don't remember. But there wasn't anybody there, so I pulled into the parking space, and Mr. Bragin's parking space was the closest to the door. So I pulled in there to unload all these sacks of fruit. Got soaked even doing that, and I'm running these tests. And a few minutes later, Mr. Taylor came in. He didn't say anything to me, and he was always Mr. Taylor. I never called him anything but Mr. Taylor. And about 15 minutes later, my father came in because he and Mr. Taylor were going to have a meeting of some kind. And he got wet coming in, and he carefully explained to me, he says, "I am Mr. Bragin, you are Steve. Get out of my space."
You were looking a little uppity then, I guess.
Yeah. Which was very unlike him, but it was funny.
Steve, did the packing house, when you were packing grapefruit and oranges, that's what I guess you were packing primarily,
mostly,
those were in boxes or in orange crates, and what labels did you go under? Did they, and how did those labels get created, as a matter of fact?
Well, let's see. If you go back far enough, all fruit was shipped in wooden boxes that weighed about 70 to 80 pounds. And they were nailed shut. They pulled a wire strap across the middle to set the top, and then the guy who did the nailing, these guys were terrific. I never learned how to do this. I tried a lot, but I never learned. They put the nails in their mouth. They were little short nails like this. And they essentially could spit the nails out into their hand and wham the thing down. And they could close up one of those boxes so fast you could hardly see their hands move. They go bing, 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 and then they go bing, 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 and the whole thing gone. And then
like a little machine.
Oh, God, they could. I never learned. I banged up more fingers than you can believe. I never was able to do that. But then they finally got smart. Those things, one, were heavy, and they really did. Well, it's something else interesting. They used to, if you had a premium brand, which we did, you wrapped the top layer of fruit in a tissue-like paper that had your label on it, usually. If you weren't high class, it didn't make the label. There was a guy by the name of Wellhouse, who had a paper plant over in Tampa, and he made most of the wraps for the whole industry. Good guy. He and I grew up together. Or he used to live in the same apartment building we did.
Oh.
And he loved my father, and he'd come downstairs and eat dinner with us a couple nights a week. I had a fight with him because I used to go upstairs and eat with him, and he insisted on my eating okra, which he never convinced me to. To this day, I won't eat okra.
It is a little slimy sometimes, isn't it?
I can't stand it.
So, Steve, you were packing up these oranges and grapefruit, and they were in wooden boxes. Now, were they ventilated boxes,
Yes,
or
ma'am.
were they solid wood?
No. These were, what's the right word? Slats, with like a half-inch. There were there was a bottom one, a middle one, and two middle ones and a top one. And they nailed the ends and strapped the middle to hold it. But they were not a good way to carry fruit. First of all, it was wooden, and as they trucked them north, whether they went to Chicago or wherever they went, there would be vibration, and some of the fruit would always get ruined. And I think it was after the Second World War that cartons, maybe before, I'm really not sure of the date, but they began to use these 30 or 40 pound cartons, which were, first of all, much better and much easier to transport and safer for the fruit.
So the names of these were unique, and those were all your family labels?
Yeah, these were the labels. There were more than this, but the most famous one we had was West Florida, or the WFLA label, which stood for West Florida. And eventually we put on the radio station, but we had the label before the radio station. Fire Chief, I can't really tell you where that came from, but the Clearwater one is obvious. But our number one brand, and when you sold them at auction, people knew by the label that was on there whether it was a number one brand or a
Or
number
not.
two or not. And of
So
course you got a premium for the number one brand.
So you gathered a reputation by the quality of the fruit and
Yes.
the label that it
Yeah.
got.
And we would sell those. We had customers like Grand Union and Safeway and Food Fair.
Kroger,
Yeah, Gristedes, which was a high-class specialty shop in the Northeast. And but grapefruit was our big thing. We shipped oranges and packed oranges, and tangerines infrequently. But grapefruit was really that was where we made our reputation.
So do you consider yourself the citrus baron, the living citrus baron?
Well, I don't think there's many of us left, since I don't have anything at all to do with the citrus business now.
But you did.
And so I can call myself a baron without trouble.
Right.
But no, we were pretty good size. We, again, to use that stilted phrase, vertically integrated, we literally tried to advance. You got different prices for different things in the fruit business. The most money you got is if you were in the gift fruit business, because the value of that fruit was significantly higher. So we got into the gift fruit business.
That was huge at your Bill Gore Groves in Clearwater,
Yeah.
where people would line up,
Yeah.
you know,
And
before Thanksgiving to
y-
ship their fruit to their family and friends in the north.
that was a, you know, a intense 2.5 month business. Harry and David was the same thing. It was before it was perfect for us because they wanted to ship the grapefruit before our shipping season for gift fruit went on. But our real business was volume. Again, the gift fruit business was the most profitable.
Mm-hmm.
But our real business was volume, and that's a lot of it I did. Sold people like Tropicana and Ben Hill Griffin, Coca-Cola eventually, likes Pasco, and
Shipping was primarily by railroad or a lot by truck? I'm now
Most-
thinking the 50s and 60s,
well,
perhaps.
the truck was the fastest. It was the fastest because those guys would leave the packing house and be at say the New York market the next day, and then they'd sell on the auction. So it was fresh, and if you could hit the market when there wasn't anybody else there or there wasn't a lot, you got a good price. And if people believed the label, then you also got a good price. But eventually that changed, the business changed because of concentrate and chill juice like Tropicana, which took enormous amounts of fruit in order to make the plants viable and profitable. Tropicana for a while there, I think was, let me see if the memory is going to work. They could do 20 loads of fruit an hour. I think that's right, if memory serves me.
Loads means
400
semi-size?
semi-truckloads,
Wow.
which were 350 boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And they needed the fruit in order to keep the plant going. That was
Let's take a little trip down memory lane in
Okay.
terms of your senses. What do you remember about smelling or tasting or feeling about the citrus industry?
the blossoms. You get the smell. In some cases, it could be overwhelming.
And what time of year would that be?
School year, the school year usually, the blooms would come, and then they, depending on whether it was early fruit or late fruit, it approximated the school year and came in to full form October, November, December, January, February again. Yeah, the smells, the feel of citrus when you were in the grove, because that's...
So how could you tell citrus was ripe? Did you pull it and
Yeah,
it
you
came
cut
off
it.
the stem?
Yeah, and you cut it. I mean, you knew about when it was time. And that same story I told you about testing it, with being Mr. Bragin and Steve, is just how you did it. You went out to the groves if you tasted it, you could tell. It was the mixture between the acids and the sugar, which gave you the ratios that were required by Florida law. You couldn't use fruit, well, you were crazy if you used fruit that really was too acidy or so forth, because when you put it together, people would bring it back because it was terrible. It didn't taste good. But there were laws and regulations as to how that ought to be done and what the ratios were. So you were testing it, always hoping to be early, because if you were early, you got more money if you did fresh fruit. But the relationship about fresh fruit had to do with its exterior appearance also, because if it didn't look pretty,
That's
You
right.
couldn't pack it. The concentrate and chilled juice guys didn't care what it looked like. As neither did we in the canning plant. We were making single strength juice. And that's interesting. I finally made an arrangement with Hood's concentrate plant in Dunedin because the relationship, they wanted higher sugar content and lower ratios, which meant that the fruit would taste sugary but somewhat flat. And in single strength juice, we wanted not so much because you lost the flavor after you canned it, but they wanted. So I used to trade loads of fruit with Hoods up in Dunedin. I'd call them up and I'd say, well, I got 2 loads on the yard that'll fit your bill. Have you got anything that you can send me and we'll trade them? And we used to trade them. The end of the month, how many did you trade? You owe me a little money, I owe you a little
Really?
money. Oh yeah.
Bartering your orange.
Oh yeah,
oranges.
we used to do it all the time. They were good guys.
In the early 60s, I came here and remember that there was a bad freeze, and
Yeah.
I think it was 62, and the pungent smell of the concentrate factories working
Oh.
all over this area was just overwhelming.
Well-
It still kind of stings my nose to think about it.
Well, the reason was that if you have a freeze, and a bad one, which we've had a couple here, let's see, how do you explain it? If you take a piece of fruit and you cut it today, there are little tiny cells inside there, and the juice is in the cells, in those little tiny cells. What happens when a freeze comes, if it lasts long enough, it eventually freezes the fruit. And it's like taking a bottle of water and putting it in your freezer with a top on it. Eventually, the ice is gonna expand, or a Coca-Cola or something like that, it'll blow the top, because if it freezes. The same things happen to those little tiny cells. They break because when it starts to warm up, they're not ice anymore, and it's free juice, and it begins to rot very quickly. So one of the tests were, you take these big citrus knives and you cut one in half and you look at the edge of the knife to see how much liquid is on there or lack of liquid. And that was one of the ways you told. But if the fruit started to go bad, you had to pick it because it would really go bad, and then you couldn't use it for anything but feed. And
So in those years, where did they go to the concentrate factories? Hood was one of them.
Hood was one. You could take them anywhere. I used to sell fruit to Pasco Packing when they had one up there. I'd sell it to Coca-Cola when they eventually bought a plant over there, or sell it to Tropicana, or use it ourselves in the canning plant. But you'd ship it all over the place because you had to use it. In fact, I used to instruct some of the drivers, if they hit one of the concentrate plants, and it was so crowded, like in Winter Haven or somewhere like that, it was so crowded, they'd call me on the radio and tell me, Steve, they got 40 too many loads on here and they're not going to be able to take the fruit. And I'd tell them go somewhere else, because if you didn't unload it and get it going, they'd turn it down, because they test it before they dumped the fruit to make sure that it wasn't rotten.
You mentioned something that I think I forgot. You had a canning plant then,
Yes.
which was the old days of canned
juice.
Juices.
Yeah,
Which,
all we made
which we
was
don't. We see it in tomato juice
yeah.
now, but not citrus so
No.
much.
Well, forgive me, guys. We made we made a decision to go into the single strength juice business, which eventually became a dying business because of concentrate and chilled juice.
Right.
And we literally were going to change it to chilled juice, but eventually decided not to. And then everybody thought we were so smart, and it wasn't being smart. We got lucky. We didn't know what to do with the canning plant because it really was non-productive. And though it was quite successful, when it was successful, it was quite successful. But chilled juice and concentrate began to
Took over the market.
Took over the market. So we didn't know what to do with it. And there was one of 2 or 3 stories about how lucky we were. There's a guy who walked into the office, and wait, I gotta think. He was from South America, and he was gonna can, I forget what the product was, but it used the same type machinery that we had, that we didn't know what to do with if we shut the plant down. And he walked in and said he's going to do this, or I forget what he was going to do down in South America. And he wanted the stainless steel machinery that we had, and we told him we weren't going to sell it. Didn't mean that. And eventually he came along and bought it, and it was just lucky, because we literally made a fortune on the stainless steel.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the sound that you remember during the time the pickers were in the groves. Was it quiet?
Oh,
was it
no,
noisy? Was it people calling out to each other, yelling at each other?
Yeah, they were singing, a lot of singing. There were, we had a field farm where we put up about 10 or 11 motel-like.
Temporary housing sort of thing?
Well, no, these became permanent right over here in Palm Harbor, which was, and people did it illegally, we did it legally. And they used to come, the Bahamians used to come, and they'd follow. When citrus was over, they'd go for peaches, and then they'd work their way all the way north. And I got to know some of them fairly well because they'd come back every year. And those were a lot of the pickers that we had.
Bahamians were the primary group of pickers that
but
came.
local guys too.
Yes.
A lot of the guys, black from the churches here, who work for us, mostly on an integrated basis, which was mostly unusual, but we did it anyway.
At that time, right.
Yeah.
What physical changes have you seen in Palm Harbor over the years?
Oh my, it's become an artsy colony. And of course the spa is still, I guess, the thing there.
Oh, it's Safety Harbor. No, I'm thinking Palm Harbor.
Oh,
I may have misspoken. Was Curlew Road paved when you had your business here?
2-lane road, and the changes really are the changes in the citrus groves going out, mostly the Joneses, who took care of an enormous amount of grove property here. In fact, the property that is just east of the cemetery where we are, Curlew Hills, was a barrow pit, and they used to sell dirt and rock out of there at the place right next door. And then the Seavers were just north here. This was terrific country, and the road was quite small. They had there's a little creek that runs down, you know. Everything from up where the Seavers are, Tampa Road, falls south from.
Picks up on Curlew Creek, isn't it?
Yes, and that's really where it all comes from, and comes down the little lake and stream that's there. And there used to be still is, I guess, like a 6 foot or 8 foot pipe that runs under the road, and it goes on down,
right,
all the way down.
At one time, that was navigable. Did you know that? I mean, obviously not the piping, but to Curlew Creek, they used to bring boats up here. Charlie said he remembers his grandfather doing that.
I don't remember that.
Well, it was a good long time ago.
And I'm so much younger.
Yes, you are so much younger than Charlie. That's right. We're going to talk in a couple of minutes about your own family, because you and Gina are so well known in this area, but I just kind of wanted to wrap it up about the citrus industry.
Sure.
What happened to citrus, and why did it go away? Why did you sell this to, or maybe you still have an interest in it, I don't know, in Curlew Hills?
Well, what happened? It's pretty simple math. We were in the citrus business, and all parts of the citrus business, we were cash buyers, as opposed to being like co-ops. We were not a co-op, we were cash buyers, so we either made money or lost money on what we bought, and if we were wrong, we could be really wrong.
Or if the weather was bad.
Or if the weather was bad. It just was a different way of life. But what began to happen here in Pinellas County, because we probably are, per square foot, the most population of almost any county in the state. Used to be, I guess
it's still true, I think.
Still true. The value of what we had as rental income, i.e. the oranges and the grapefruit that we grew and sold, that was like rental income. But then the value of the land started going up and up and up, and there was a place at which it no longer was viable to grow citrus. And then, of course, in the 60s, when the freezes hit, you didn't have the income because it got frozen, and it would take 3 or 4 years before it was going to come back. So the opportunity to sell became much nicer, and the originators of the firm were dying, getting old, died off. And nobody was interested in the business, and the value wasn't there. So,
did the state have a lot of regulations on the citrus industry?
Yes, they did, but they mostly, there were guys like Ulmer and Lumsden and other people like that, who their children, if you went back far enough, became inspectors if they weren't in the business. And their inspection had to do with the quality of what you shipped. There were reasonably loose regulations, but there were regulations, more so in the single strength, in the juice business, they were much tighter. And they were tighter for self-preservation, because if you had fruit that you put in cans that were highly acid as opposed to being sweet tasting, first of all, it would eat into the side of the can quicker, which it eventually would do, and it would taste terrible, and taste terrible is not good. You know, so
Yeah, there was sometimes you bought orange juice and it had a little tinny flavor, as a matter of fact.
and the secret was that you aerated it by pouring it back and forth to the can, to the glass. You did it once or twice, it'd disappear.
That was never your juice that tasted tinny, of course.
I understood perfectly what you were saying.
You and your wife Gina are well known in this area, and I know Gina is from Tampa too. So I assume you met her there. But how did you two meet, or did you go to school together? Or what was your meeting up
She lived a
story?
block and a half from me in Hyde Park, 2 blocks. I lived at 902 South Dakota, and she lived at 902 Orleans, which was actually it was the end of the block, so it was like 3 blocks away. And we knew each other since we were small children. We went to the same temple. My parents knew her father, who was one of the icons that I ever knew.
And he was an icon because?
He literally could have invented the word entrepreneur. He did more things that most people don't know anything about, and successfully, than almost anybody I knew. He also was a pilot. He owned his own plane, and I have his pilot's license, which is, I think, 121, signed by Orville Wright.
Oh, no kidding! Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I also
I want to see that, Steve.
Yeah. Well, there are 2 telegrams to Jerry. That's what he was called. To Jerry, dear Jerry, sorry I can't meet you. Maybe we can do it later, or something like that. Orville. It was a telegram from Orville, right? He knew. But Gina, you know, kids used to go for Sunday drives with their parents. Everybody did.
Did they?
Oh, yeah, down here, you know, it was a big day out and they'd go for a drive. Except Gina used to get in the back of the open cockpit plane and go for a flying with her father at a Davis Island airport. Yeah, on Sunday. She can tell you about that. But he was a...
So you knew each other as kids, but then it just was kind of a natural relationship that just happened, or?
I guess this is going to be for posterity. She'll kill me. We had my grandfather lived with me, David, for years, and they used to leave at 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:30, or 6 to come over here and go to work. And we had a maid and a cook in our house at the apartment that we lived in, Seville Apartments, which was, as I said, 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, living room, dining room, sewing room. You know, it was a big apartment. And Gina's mother had died when she was 14.
I didn't know
14,
that.
Yeah. And she really was raised partially by her older sister, Cecile, and the maid, Jenny. And Jenny And we had a maid, Victoria. And as I'm growing up and got back from the service, I guess. Yeah, I had gotten back from the service. And Victoria said to me one morning, she's fixing breakfast, and she says, "You ought to take out Gina." I never took her out. And I said, "I don't want to take her out." She said, "You want breakfast tomorrow morning?" That's a true story. She liked Gina. I knew her, and she used to come by the house. I mean, we all knew each other. It was
a friendship, not
a tiny little neighborhood. All of us had lived in Hyde Park and grew up and were approximately the same age. We all knew each other. I mean,
Sure.
I really shouldn't tell these stories.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm so shy. There was a good friend of mine, Broadus Livingston, who eventually became managing director of the big law firm over in Tampa. He and I grew up together. And Broadus used to say, "Listen, Steve, don't give me a hard time. I slept with your wife before you did." And the reason was that the two of them used to be in the same baby carriage together.
Ah, cute. Oh, I think that's okay to tell.
It's all right if it isn't. It's too bad.
Well, you got married in Tampa, I presume,
Yes.
and then what brought you to Pinellas County besides business? Obviously, probably convenience.
And the latter is correct. I saw my father, who had eventually moved over here, spend 25 years driving back and forth, 32 here and 32 back, and do it, 5 days, 6 days a week. And in fact, back in the early days, if we came over to spend a weekend or something like that, or to spend a day, if he was only going to work a half a day, and we'd go to the beach, and something happened and he had to work late, he was running the plant, and he said, "I can't do it," he wouldn't let my mother drive back to Tampa at dark.
Mm-hmm.
Because if anything happened, you got a flat tire or anything.
Yeah, well, the car broke down, right?
There wasn't anybody around, so he wouldn't let her. We'd spend the night at the Gray
Moss?
Gray Moss Inn, thank you.
Indeed.
Yeah, we'd spend the night at Gray Moss Inn. But that's literally how I took Gina out, and then that was only 58 years ago.
Mm. You've lived in the same house for a long time. How did you happen to choose that house?
We did because of my father's driving back and forth all the time. I wasn't going to do that. I figured we could, but most of our friends were Tampa.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I knew Hayes Kennedy from over here, Kennedy and Strickland, and I knew some guys over here. And Al Rahara was an old buddy of mine. He thought I was a terrific athlete, and he wanted me to. Well, Al was a great guy, and I can't say anything bad about him, but he sure was a hustler.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted me to move to Clearwater because he wanted me to go to Clearwater High School because I was a pretty good athlete, and I could then play tennis and football for Clearwater High, but I couldn't do it unless I lived at a Pinellas County address. I think it had to be in Clearwater, too.
Right.
And he came over and gave this big conversation to my father, and I was really friendly with Hayes Kennedy, who his nickname from the early days was Rooster. And they were I think they were automobile dealers. Kennedy Strickland was the name of the, I think it was Ford, but it might have been Chevrolet, I don't remember. And he and Al wanted me to move over here. My father threw him out of the office. My father didn't have a lot of patience with it. But
So then, but you got married, and you and Gina moved here, and
Yeah,
then
yeah, we moved
I mean,
here.
what did you live in? An apartment like you
No.
had lived in all your life, or
no. Well, first, right after we got married, I was significantly smarter than my father and my uncle. In case you didn't know that, I was.
yeah, you were in your
I
20s
was.
and you knew a lot more.
Man, I knew everything. And I told them, I want to go north and make contact with some of the major chains. Because even in those days, unless you really loused it up, you could get their business and keep it. I mean, if you did something wrong, you were going to lose it. And some of them and it was difficult to do over the phone. And I told them, if you'll support me, I'll go to Philadelphia and call on people like Food Fair and I don't know who else, 2 or 3 other people, and see if we can't lock up some of that business. And as it turned out, it was successful. But then when we came back, I said, we're going to have to live in Clearwater because I'm not going back and forth. And there was a woman by the name of Helen Petusik. Never forget her. She really probably was one of the first lady realtors. In our part of Pinellas County, Clearwater. And she drove me crazy for a while, and I finally told her she'd have to call Gina. And she found the house that we are living in today, which when Indian Rocks Road really had some shell on it, and it was Bailey's Corner, which really became some of the development. She found the house, and we've been in that house 56 years, I think. Yeah.
So did you love the house? Did Gina love the house?
no,
did
Gina-
you feel like you were moving to the provinces after being in the big city of
well,
Tampa?
That's Gina. I've only told Gina a couple times, absolutely not, in all the years we've been married. One is when she wanted to fire a gun, learn to shoot a pistol. I said, no way. You get mad at me and I'm gone. So, and the other thing is I told her, there's no way I'm going to let you build a house. You find something you like and revise it, but if you start from the ground up, it'll never end. She's a perfectionist, which I'm not. We don't get along good.
Oh, well, that's a pretty good yin and yang,
Yeah.
actually, I think, since you've been together for 50 plus years.
Yeah, well, it seems to work. The answer is I say, yes, dear, and it works all the time.
Right.
But in any case,
So you found this house in
She
Bel Air
found-
Bluffs.
in Bel Air Bluffs, Indian Rocks Road was a 2-lane road, and so was Bay Drive. In fact, I think one of them ended and it became Shell shortly thereafter. And she liked it, and she revised it.
So Helen sold it to you. What did your parents think, and what did her parents think about your living in
Well,
this
my
faraway place?
Yeah, well, I think my mother by that time they had moved. Yes, they had moved from Tampa to Clearwater. Father had passed away, and so Gina went and got Molly, my mother, to show her the house. My mother called me the next day, and Gina was crazy about the house. My mother called me the next day. She says, "What are you, crazy? You can't take that city girl and move her way out in the country like that." And that was Bay Drive and West Bay Drive and Indian Rocks Road.
And probably you felt like you were coming to the country when you came up to the groves up here too.
Oh, sure. It was country. There were, what was the woman's name who lived on the other side? Bullard was on the other side. Seaver was up here. We were up here. Elfers was, north of us.
Sure.
And it was all citrus. We used to put picking crews on Indian Rocks Road or one or two of the other roads in South County, and they'd stay there all season because it was all citrus. But it's good stuff.
Finally, Steve, I wonder, just lastly, what would you like people to remember or think about in Palm Harbor in some kind of perspective of history and age? It's a rich place in many ways.
It really is a rich place. I think I might have told you this. I've had so few disappointments. I'm one of the lucky people in this world. I've had so few disappointments. But the one that I remember vividly when I was interviewed 15 years ago, 20 years, was when I used to make contracts with people on a handshake and on a telephone. Some people I had never met, and I'm talking about serious contracts for 50, 60 loads of fruit, which in those days was a lot of money. Ben Hill Griffin, for years I never met Ben Hill Griffin, but I used to do business with him on the phone. And one day, a number of years ago, and it was a small, let me just back up, it was a very small group of people who were cash buyers like we were. They weren't cooperatives.
Right.
And there was 10, 15 people. And so long as your word was good, you could do business all day long. I mean, and nobody, and I never had a bad deal. And one day I got a telephone call from one or two of the guys and said, Steve, you better take and write those contracts down and register them in the courthouse. And to this day, that's probably one of the more disappointing things that ever happened to me. I mean,
The time had passed
when you could trust people.
Yep.
And your word was good. I mean, I can remember talking to people like Tony Rossi down in Tropicana, and I owed him, and there was a freeze or something, or the price got upside down, and I was, having to deliver it for half of what it was worth. And the phone would ring. And he'd say, Steve, you all right? I said, yes, sir. I'm still delivering. I said, oh, yeah, whatever it was. He says, well, I'm pretty well loaded up. He says, you okay? And he'd indicate that he would adjust the price if it really was bad. And I had no contract with him. I'd walk in, shake hands.
Right.
It was just a different world.
Yep. Well,
and that kind of thing went on here with the Joneses. I mean, we did business with the Joneses forever. Never had a contract with them. Never. Or Seaver, I used to get his fruit. He had a brother who did railroad trains.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
You're right.
Yes.
Where did that come from?
Yep. Over on 15th Street and
Yeah.
Tampa Road.
Yep. Yeah.
19th Street. I'm
19th
sorry,
Street,
19th
yeah.
Street. Yep.
And he was a sweet man. And when he found out I had a son, he made me a tabletop about half the size of that, and insisted that I not buy this engine because it wasn't good enough. I should buy the other engine.
Well, Steve, you have
I
a
wanna
wonderful
wake
story to
up
tell, and you've given us
in
a
the
great
morning
perspective on the
where
citrus
the
industry as it was here.
blossoms
I want to
grow,
shake your hand because
and
I
the
think
sun comes
that the
peeping
handshake
in
that you're
where I've
talking
been
about is a
sleeping,
time of
and
the past,
songbirds say,
but it's still very sweet. Thank
I
you,
love the
Steve
fresh
Bragin.
air and the sunshine. It's good for us, you know. So I'll make my home in Florida, where the orange blossoms grow.